You want me to start, Sajidan?
Good evening. Thank you, Ganesh. I just want to take 30 seconds.
Sure.
Dr. Ganesh Natarajan does not require any introduction from me. I don't have to introduce him. I just want to say, Ganesh, thank you so much for taking out time, being here second time on my initiative. So I really appreciate, feels privileged. And to tell you, here is a forum that I began during the pandemic. I thought my co-colleagues, CXOs, CEO friends who are working, and of course, everybody had certain challenges in business while pandemic or post-pandemic. And one of the thought that I had in my mind during September, October, that I need some of the stalwarts like you to come and interact with this group. But post-pandemic, how does it look like on building business in India? And that especially coincided with your article couple of weeks back on LinkedIn, and that sort of a confirmation from I need you to come on the board and talk to these guys, and what is coming our way to our country looks like very positive pipeline. What is that, and how do we scale up from here, right? So guys, Ganesh, for all of you, after Ganesh's speech, maybe we'll have a lot of interaction because he has reserved about an hour for just talking to you than typical presentation. Thank you, Ganesh.
Thank you very much, Sachidanand. And yeah, you're right. I mean, I think it was that Financial Express article that triggered off this discussion. And I honestly don't have a real agenda in the sense, I mean, as you know, I do a lot of public speaking, and particularly in the last 11 months, I think I've tried to make sure that I have at least 3 hours every week, either 2 sessions or 3 sessions, just to talk to people who may want to interact and discuss, and my own thinking on so many topics, whether it's digital transformation, whether it is the future of India, economy. We are just writing a book in the Pune International Center, which is all about what we call restoring the economic asymmetry with China. As all of you know, 20 years ago, India and China were almost parallel. Today, China's economy is huge, which gives them obviously the guts to do what they're doing in Ladakh and say that, look, we no longer care about India. They used to call it the Asian century, and now it's become the Chinese century. So I think, we have a lot of catching up to do. And unfortunately, as we all know, I mean, this is not the best time for India because we've been devastated much more in the first 9 to 10 months of COVID than many other countries. Now, of course, it's looking very positive. I mean, just looking at, while we were talking, the L&T results that have come out, which is fantastic. All the IT companies doing phenomenally well. Reliance, okay, a little bit of a mixed bag. But it does look, as RBI said this morning, that we are bidding for better times. So I thought what I will do is, and forgive me if there's a lot of stuff that is repetitive, I'll just take maybe about 25, 30 minutes and lay out the various themes I'm working on. Okay, and I will not mention China because I just already mentioned it. But just in terms of giving us cues for a conversation. And after that, I mean, I have absolute time till 7:30 since Sachidanand told me I have to be here. So till 7:30, any questions, any suggestions, any ideas, very happy to do that. So I think that's broadly what the agenda is. One thing I dislike about Zoom is the minute I put on my presentation, I lose eye contact. So forgive me for that. Let me find my presentation first. Okay. Can you see my presentation, folks?
Yes,
absolutely. Yep. Okay, good. So this is a topic that Sachidanand wanted me to talk about. So I said, look, I mean, we all know that we hope that we are entering a post-COVID world. So looking at what's happening with the UK strain and the South African strain, and I was just talking to my daughter who's a cancer specialist in New York. So she was saying that, look, you guys don't be too complacent because all it needs is one city to catch the UK strain and spread it. And then we are back to where we were. So I think that's something we need to think about. But let's assume, since everybody is hyped up, and I was just wandering around my friend Manjari's favorite restaurant, in camp, day before yesterday, and I was shocked. I mean, it's teeming with people, 99% of them not wearing masks. So in Pune, we almost think that the COVID is over. So I just hope that the Pune optimism translates to reality, but let's wait and see. So assuming that we are truly on the growth path, assuming that we will all come back in March, maybe to office, maybe not to office, depending on our preference, and not because of COVID, let's take stock on where we are and what's happened to the world. This is the first point I wanted to make, which is pretty obvious. We all know this. I mean, the COVID pandemic clearly has done a lot of bad things for the world. And this was a prediction some time back, and I don't think it's going to change, that the global economy, which was expected before COVID to grow like 2.5% this year, will probably shrink by 3%. India, of course, I mean, there's this absolutely inane WhatsApp joke which talks about a man who's planning to commit suicide from the 25th floor of a building. And he jumps from the 25th floor, and he's obviously plummeting down to earth. And on the 10th floor, somebody opens a window and says, "Are you doing okay?" Which is a real stupid question to ask. He says, "At this point of time, I'm doing fine." Okay, which is a true answer. And if you look at the comparison, I mean, we declined 24.9% in the first quarter. It came down to about 9.8% in the second quarter. This quarter, they're actually expecting some growth thanks to the festival season, etc. Fourth quarter, God knows. But even so, I think RBI has said that from what we thought could be 12% GDP decline, it'll still be a decline. It could be 8%. Who knows? Miracles may happen and we may only decline 6%. But whatever be the case, let's face it, guys, we are talking about a country which needs to grow 8 to 10% every year for the next 2 decades to bring 300 million people out of poverty. They do a lot of work in the social sector, like my friend Manjari here. And we all know the plight of not just migrant workers, but from people all over the country who are really, really, really suffering. So when you look at the farmer crisis, you look at other stuff, you really hope that things will happen. But if you look at this statistic, even if we decline only by 8% and manage to grow 11% on a low base next year, which is 22-23, you will be in March 2023 where we were in March 2019, which means the 3 years loss because of the COVID and the aftermath. So that's the problem. Job losses, we've all stopped counting. I mean, in the US and UK, etc., is disguised because, you know, the big stimulus packages, I mean, even as you know, people who have been fired are not actually fired because they're getting their salary. That's the beauty of government stimulus, which obviously India, with its kind of disastrous fiscal situation, has not been able to do. What we just talked about, I think, as we were chatting, I think new ways of working, collaborating, managing, we've all seen high initial productivity. I mean, I'm still enjoying high initial productivity because I spend 4 hours in office and then I'm managing to work right from 6 in the morning till 11 at night with multiple calls and Zoom, etc., etc. But not everybody can do it. And there are also psychological issues. I've seen a lot of people suffering from isolation, depression. It's not going to be easy to say that, look, you know, you suddenly come back to work. Because, I mean, there is a certain psychological state of the mind that gets created by too much of work from home. And we won't get into that because I don't think anybody has analyzed it to a final situation. And we've seen blended work methods. I'm on the board of State Bank of India. And interestingly, in October onwards, we started physical board meetings. So we said, look, once a month, we will meet in a large boardroom in Mumbai. The rest we have weekly board meetings. So the weekly meetings are all obviously on WebEx. But we are finding, in fact, we took a decision in October that every manager of State Bank, from the chairman downwards, will come to office every day. And of course, people who report to them, there'll be 30% coming to work, etc., social distancing, etc. And it's worked very well. And in State Bank, we have a work from anywhere policy. We have unfortunately lost close to 100 people across the big bank through to COVID, because I think State Bank, as you probably know, caters to a lot of senior citizens. And senior citizens, in spite of our YONO payment platform, still want to come to office, still want to have that cup of tea with the bank manager. So I think, you know, that all that is causing some stress, but it's happening. So I think, you know, that's the new way of working, blended work methods, as I said. Gig, I'm sure all of you have heard of. I mean, the gig economy is something that many of my classmates from NITI who went to the US discovered 10 years back. Most of my classmates at the age of maybe 45, 50 decided enough was enough of working for JP Morgan or whoever. And they set up their own shop and they're very happily working maybe 30 hours a week or 20 hours a week and playing golf and enjoying life. And I think Indians will also begin to do that. We have been a very work-obsessed nation, but I think that's changing. And of course, if you remember, I think Henry Ford was the first guy to talk about this piece rate assembly line system in manufacturing. That's happening today. I mean, even in our own organization, we have a discussion on Monday where we say that, look, how do we pay for outcomes rather than pay for showing up? So just because you come to office on Monday morning and leave and stay till Friday night, doesn't mean you're working. But if you actually produce output, whether it's content or whatever business you are in, I think that's it. So I think this is, as you can see, it's a very mixed bag. Some people have enjoyed the changes of COVID. Some people have hated it. But be that as it may, going forward and pulling us back to a 10% per year growth for the next 10 years is not going to be easy for the country. Digital, and many of you are digital folks here, so I won't bore you with all this. And I don't even want to walk you through this slide. The slide is all about technology. I mean, we all know about, or maybe we think we know about big data, IoT, mobile, cloud computing, etc. Let's not go there. I mean, I have my two friends who helped us to build one of our platforms and sell one of our platforms, which is both Shashi and Samir. Samir was the UX expert on one of our platforms, and Shashi actually built the first website. So we have both of you to thank for, I think, what we have accomplished in that area. But I mean, so the whole user interface, all that is very much part of digital. If you go down one layer, this is what we're seeing. We're seeing that what it has done is have a very integrated digital and physical experience. And I'll talk a little bit about customer journeys as we go along. In every business, we're finding that digital touch points are becoming extremely important. This is one good news of the digital acceleration we've seen in the last 1 year. What was expected to happen in 5 years has actually happened probably in 6 months or so. Internet of everything. Everything is connected from your washing machine to your car to anything. I mean, that's something. In fact, I must tell you, this is amusing one. I was doing a keynote for the Indian School of Business, and there were two of us speaking. The other guy was an Indian who lives in New York and is the AI expert for the National Basketball Association, which is the New York State basketball team. And he was talking about the future of AI-enabled basketball. And he was saying that, look, we are inventing technology which is built on neural networks. So as a huge basketball player is charging down the court to kind of shoot his basket, and 3 people are coming to block him, the AI is automatically predicting where each of the 3 guys will go, left, right, forward, backwards, based on their past record, and sending him a message. Now you turn left and run, and you'll hit the basket. Now I'm just wondering, saying, if we are able to guide physical movement through AI, I mean, what do we even have to do? I mean, we just have to be there, and AI will take us away. So I mean, these are scary in one dimension, but it's happening. I mean, the research is actually enabling my friend in New York to do this. We all know about robotic process automation, which is knowledge work, big data, advanced analytics. I'll talk a little bit about it as we go along. Social metrics, which of course is not very, very popular today with all that's happening on WhatsApp and Facebook and Google and everything else. But essentially, one thing we have seen is anything as a service is becoming a reality. I mean, no longer will people invest in big data centers, etc. So I think whether it's platform as a service, application as a service, data as a service, that's happening. Most important, which I think for people who are not in tech in this small group, we're finding that the big benefits are the middle one, enhancing productivity. We are seeing it ourselves right here on Zoom. If all of us can join, including Manjari from Milton Keynes in UK, it just shows you that, look, the whole days of travel for a meeting are completely passé. Improving the experience, which we are seeing on a daily basis as more and more, even Zoom, we were interviewing Eric, the founder of Zoom, about a month back at the India Internet Conference. And Eric was saying, even as many of you may be knowing, Eric was working in Cisco. He was one of the architects of WebEx technology. And he told us, look, I went to China once and asked people, what do you think of WebEx? And he said, nobody had a good word about it. It was so difficult to use. And he said, I'm going to quit and build something which, literally at the click of a button, people can get on, which is what Zoom is all about. And today, of course, we have new technologies which are even better. Most important, as I think most of us know, the new business models that are being enabled by digital are probably the most interesting. I mean, just to give you some, I was talking to this to my Rotary Club 3 days back, so I just pulled out 2 slides from there. I mean, we've seen communications happening right from the way the Ramayana and the Mahabharata were written, to typists, to stenotypists, to telex operators. And today we're finding that, as I said, AI can communicate almost everything. If you look at farming, for instance, I think, even I did a lot of work with Bajaj Insurance, and they do a whole bunch of work in crop insurance. And if you look at crop insurance today, nobody goes to the field. I mean, they have sent out a drone, they get pictures, there is an automatic GPS monitoring of what premium to be charged. So everything is kind of integrated. So I think even something as traditional as plowing and tractors and now drones, digital is changing everything. And of course, the whole call center space. I'm on the board of Hinduja Global Solutions, which is one of the significant BPO companies here. And we're finding that we are now implementing cognitive customer response centers all over the world, which literally means that instead of having 3,000 bums on seats in a call center, you now have 3 people, and that's really managing the whole artificial intelligence enabled automated response systems. So I think we are talking about a completely new world emerging, and if any of you are interested, we can talk a little bit about the whole employment crisis that will cause, but we look at that. So basically, what are we saying? We're saying the digital transformation fundamentally affecting all industries. I remember in January of last year, which was just before COVID hit, I was in Saudi Arabia. actually presenting on digital to one of the conferences there. And I showed this slide. And somebody got up in a huff and said, "Sir, I object to your slide." I said, "Why? What happened?" He says, "In your slide, the bottom is oil and gas." And he says, "Tomorrow you please come to Saudi Aramco." This was in Bahrain. "I will show you the extent of digital we're using." He's right. I mean, today there is no sector which is not using digital technology. And most sectors are realizing that if you're not very heavy users of digital, you're probably missing a trick somewhere. This is something we are all aware of. The beauty of digital is it just needs information, data, and analytics to create a business. So you look at Uber, look at Facebook, look at Alibaba, look at Airbnb. All these are in very different segments, but none of these own assets. So the measure that I always used to worry about when I was running public limited companies like Aptech and Zensar, a measure called return on capital employed, is irrelevant because you don't want to employ capital. If at all you want to employ your money, it is in digital marketing, it's in brand building, etc. And who cares? Well, Uber doesn't own any cars. Airbnb owns no rooms. I mean, they're all trading on what you own, which you want to give away on a shared economy basis. So I think this is something that nobody could have predicted some time back. Essentially, what are we saying? We're saying digital is all about moving from the cost model. That was, I remember being very surprised 12 years ago when Mark Zuckerberg said that we will never ever charge the customer for anything. But today, if you look at e-commerce, whether it's Flipkart or Myntra or whoever else, I mean, initially all they did was take money from the pockets of investors and put it into the customer's pocket. You get 40% lower prices on Amazon because, I mean, so well-funded company. So that's the cost model that we started with, which is what Amazon did and Google did and Alibaba did and Facebook did. Moved very quickly to the experience model. I mean, today, if you look at Netflix, and I mean, I'm hoping, I saw 20 minutes of Tribanga the other day, and tomorrow I want to maybe see half an hour of White Tiger, and hopefully remember all this and eventually see everything. This convenience of not having to go to a movie theater and getting bored to death for 2.5 hours is completely gone away. Now, it also leads to fractionalizing the mind, which is a different problem. But I'm just saying the experience model is completely different. It's instant gratification, completely no friction, on a lot of prediction on Netflix keeps reminding me that I haven't seen the second part of this, and would you like to see that, etc., etc. All of us are used to that. The platform model, which I think all of us are implementing it, and this is the complete changeover where multiple users can use one platform. And the platform that, for instance, Samir helped us build and Shashi helped us to market is all about a fictional character called Aditi, who can now manage her entire learning end to end. And in fact, I'll show you one slide which I think was created by Shashi Sudhanshu of Ogdi. And I'll show you how platforms are really changing the way we do simple stuff like learning as well, apart from everything else that we're talking about. So moving on, and this I'll close the topic on digital with a couple of slides. One is, we are saying this is the new digital. I mean, if I go bottom left and then move clockwise, social listening, which is all about, I remember doing this for Cisco 8 years back when I was running Zensar, and where we said that, look, and if you go to the Cisco's, what they call Building 9 in San Jose, California, you will see these huge screens where, it actually tracks the heat maps that, where is somebody saying something negative about the Cisco brand. If it's somebody in Ukraine, we had the ability through social listening to almost immediately fire off, that wasn't AI, but it was more BI-based actual tweets to counter that negative impact. So social listening and managing the brand through social listening is becoming big. Cognitive automation, I mentioned that. I mentioned the cognitive call center earlier. Augmented collaboration. My friend, a gentleman called Martin Migoya of Globant. Globant is a $300-400 million company and was started by 4 footballers from Argentina. And now it's trading at nearly $2 billion market cap on the New York Stock Exchange. And what they're doing now is amazing. They're reinventing collaboration. So I was talking to Martin, and Martin said, look, one big problem we have with all the Zoom and every other call is you're not meeting new people because you are almost being set up to meet the same people that you want to meet, which is the reason I said in the beginning of this call, I like doing these, if I may call you guys a blind date. Now, I don't know who Sachidanand will get me to meet, but it's still good to renew old collaborations like Manjari and Samir and Shashi and so many other people. Vishwas Mahajan, I think, was joined, and meet new people. So I think that is a missing in this current world. So what they are doing is amazing, actually. And I think many of you can learn from this. They say that, look, we're using AI. And if let's say there are 300 people in a work group, every Friday, everybody has to meet a new person for half an hour on Zoom. And they're using AI to predict that this guy also went to a business school in some place. and you guys will have something in common. He says that the chance coffee conversation or the chance meeting of somebody at lunch, we're kind of replicating through collaboration on a almost managing the chance. So that's augmented collaboration. So I'm just giving you some examples. Quantum computing and 5G, of course, we will get it faster than we like, thanks to Mukesh Bhai and Jio, I'm sure. But we haven't even understood what could be the impact of quantum computing. And 5G, of course, is something we need to wait for, because even today, sad to say, I mean, if you drive 20 minutes outside Lucknow, your Wi-Fi will start dropping so fast that you can't be communicating, which is another big reason why a lot of work from home is not happening or not happening very effectively. This is something I mentioned earlier, customer journeys, and I won't walk you through this. By the way, anyway, any of you want these slides, Sachidanand, I'll send you a PDF. Feel free to send it, not a problem at all. And but I'm saying right from the entire journey, customers are almost shuffling between physical touch points and digital touch points. You may actually see some PR or see a TV program, then you kind of move up to email, it becomes back to the digital mainframe. And today, nobody really knows at what stage a customer will buy. So you have to have digital touch points everywhere, 24/7. That's I did 1 year of work as a digital advisor to McKinsey after I finished Zensar. And most of the work we were doing was this. We were actually doing these workshops to map new customer journeys. And it doesn't matter to me whether you're in insurance, whether you're in manufacturing, whether you're in startups. I think if you don't know how people are moving in their consideration, you've lost a plot somewhere. So I think right from awareness to consideration to purchase to servicing to loyalty expansion is happening through these physical, digital combined journeys. Just a point on this. I'm sure all of you have heard of IBM Watson. And in the early days, even I used to think it was this large supercomputer. Today, as we all know, it's nothing but a set of APIs. So you could actually get some Watson APIs and make it happen for you. And don't forget, this guy Stanley Kubrick in 1968, when many of you were not born, actually produced a movie called 2001 Space Odyssey and actually introduced a fictional computer called HAL 9000. If you look at the capabilities of an IBM Watson in terms of cognitive and predicting what you want, etc., it's absolutely amazing. It's stunning how people are doing this. And interestingly, in fact, I remember this is about 3-4 years ago, I think, this lady, Ginny Rometty, who was the chairperson or chairman of IBM, she was in Bangalore. So they invited 10 of us to Bangalore to just have dinner with Ginny, which was, of course, a great honor because how often do you meet the global chairman of IBM? I was sitting at the dinner table with her and generally we're chatting. So she asked me, so what's your family like? I told her I have a daughter. She lives in New York and she's a cancer specialist in Sloan Kettering Hospital. And she said, oh my God, your daughter is one of our first users because IBM Watson's first and biggest implementation has been in cancer research in Memorial Sloan Kettering. So I couldn't resist. So under the table, I kind of sent a WhatsApp to my daughter saying, I'm sitting with the chairperson of IBM. And she's saying that you guys are the biggest beneficiaries. And my daughter being my daughter, she immediately WhatsApped back saying, you please tell the chairperson of IBM that her computer sucks. It's totally useless for all of us. So I actually showed the WhatsApp to Ginny and said, Ginny, this is what my daughter is saying. Now what do I tell her? So Ginny turns at me and smiles, and she's very smart. You don't become chairperson of IBM for losing your cool. She said, your daughter is absolutely right. I said, oops. She said, look, it's people like her who are going to change the world because she is at the top of the line cancer specialist. But she, by interacting with IBM, is giving IBM the intelligence that, and she pointed to the person sitting next on the table, saying he was a director of Manipal Hospital in Bangalore. He said, this gentleman just bought IBM Watson, and your daughter is going to be training his cancer specialists through IBM Watson. So I said, what a comeback that was. No, but actually, if you think about it, it's true. You're kind of leveling the intelligence by just bringing intelligence to the entire community through the APIs and everything else. Think about it that way. I think that's really what the world is moving towards. This is something that we all know, but I must mention it for any one person who doesn't know this. I mean, when we talk about data and analytics, people all think, oh, data management we've been doing, we've heard of databases before, business intelligence was always there. What is happening today, thanks to, in fact, I do a lot of work with an NGO called Educate Girls, and they're implementing some of the most sophisticated machine learning. What we do in the Educate Girls is we work in Uttar Pradesh, Madhya Pradesh, and Rajasthan, and work in all the rural pockets, Pali, Rajasthan, where internet is not even reached. But even there, our goal is to put every girl child back into school. And I just finished the board meeting of Educate Girls this morning, so it's fresh in my mind. But the kind of machine learning models they're getting to predict that, look, this girl might drop out 6 months later because of this problem in her family is amazing. Our efficiency has gone up by almost 3 times thanks to machine learning and modeling. So essentially what we're saying is we all have to move beyond postmortems or what we call descriptive analytics, the third bubble you see there, all the way to exploratory, predicting what may happen, prescribing what should happen, the way Amazon does to you and me without our knowing it. And this is where I think the world is moving as we go along. Like, as I told you, even the basketball example I took earlier was exactly that. I mean, it's like literally predicting which way the defender will move and prescribing to the attacker which way he should go to get the basket. So this is something that's happening in every industry, every segment of what we're talking about. Factories of the future, again, I won't mention this. It's just a very busy slide to show how AI will move. And today we all know that. Look, I was talking to this gentleman from ABB at one of the NASSCOM sessions 2 years ago. And he was talking about the latest factory they have just outside Beijing. And if you look at his factory, he said, look, it's a robotic factory using robots to make robots and employs exactly two people in a control tower and 400 robots actually manufacturing 4,000 robots per day. I mean, this is completely controlled by automation and machine learning and everything else. And that's the factory of the future. Material handling, storage, production planning, everything managed by computers. So I think this is something that we're all seeing. And again, with IoT on the shop floor, everything from predictive maintenance can be managed through technology. So let me move to the second part of my session. I'll stop in about 10 minutes, not worry. So we're saying that if you're looking at these connected physical digital relationships happening all the time, how do people really start liking tech? It's easy for you and me, we're all intelligent people, many of us are running companies, to understand and appreciate tech. But what does that man sitting in maybe Jabalpur in a chai shop, how does he build a relationship with tech? So we're saying when we are in our own organizations, we must realize that tech is going to happen not because of tech, but it's going to happen when you are able to make life easier for the employee as well as the customer. So that's the first part. All operations, I mentioned this customer journeys earlier. So you have to invest in new processes. We used to do sessions even 30 years back when we said, look, a day will come when technology will always be 5th generation, but our processes will remain 3rd generation. And unfortunately, our people will remain 1st generation. Many of us who are digital immigrants know that problem. Today, of course, the digital natives, the young kids who grew up with digital don't have a problem, but I think they're still facing that conundrum. Data analytics I mentioned. But what is extremely important, and I think, when you talk about scale-ups happen to companies which are innovating ahead of the game. So even today, if you look at our 14 or 15 unicorns, the billion-dollar valuation guys, I think all of them have done stuff which is ahead of the game, have become what they call category creators rather than category leaders. Because it's okay to be top market share in an existing segment, but it's much more useful, as C.K. Prahalad said, to build opportunity share in a segment that has not been tapped. Classic example is Apple. I mean, there are a lot of great quotes by Steve Jobs. My favorite one is a very arrogant statement by Steve, who says that, look, you can never expect that the customer will know what she wants. What a contrarian statement, because we all think we should first find out what the customer wants and then make the product. Apple, as you know, always made products ahead of their time, and they made customers lust for it, like the iPhone, like the iPad, etc., etc. So that's the innovation ecosystem piece that every organization needs to develop. Otherwise, you can't scale. And of course, the culture and skills for the new digital organization. And I won't talk more about this because my 10th book is coming out sometime in March, April, which is exactly this one, where 3 of us have got together, me, my wife, and a very good friend of mine, Lavanya. So we got together during COVID times, and in 6 months, we wrote this book for Bloomsbury, which is exactly the theme. Now, how do those 5 forces come together to create digital companies, digital societies, digital human beings, and digital country? So we actually worked with the ministry to create the whole vision for Digital India and put this as part of this book. So I think this is something that we are looking excited about. What does it mean for people? What it means is that we have to work. I mean, I don't know how many of you have met Sophia or heard of Sophia. She was with us in NASSCOM in the India Leadership Summit about 3 years back. Sophia is nothing but an extremely smart AI-enabled android or robot, whatever you call her. And you talk to Sophia, she'll kind of talk back to you. And I remember in Bombay, in the Grand Hyatt, Indians will always be Indians. So Sophia was standing outside, and this guy goes to her and asks, "Sophia, mere saath date pe aayogi kya?" So obviously, Sophia doesn't understand Hindi, but she looks at him, literally looks at him, and says, "I don't understand what you're saying." Okay, and it's almost like she was doing a rebuff. And she's such a smart person. I mean, I had a 10-minute conversation with Sophia, And she was like picking up what I was saying, answering back, maybe talking about something related. Amazing. I'm saying if the world becomes, I mean, it's not 7 billion people, but if you have a billion Sophias or 5 billion, even a million Sophias, believe me, they can take over the planet. So this is what we're seeing. In fact, the story goes that Sophia, when she made a presentation in Saudi Arabia, the king of Saudi actually made her an honorary citizen on the spot. If you Google Sophia, you'll see it on the internet. So it's amazing how automation is taking over. So what does that mean? And this is the last part of my conversation. What does it mean for people that everything you and I were taught in engineering is obsolete today? I mean, if you look at the great rush when I was running Aptech, everybody wanted to be a programmer. Initially it was COBOL, then BASIC, then Java, whatever. But today, all that is being automated. Testing is being automated. Infrastructure support is being automated. Almost, I mean, there's no real repetitive job or cognitive job that cannot be done by. So, what is the future? In fact, we do a lot of career counseling with young people. So, we're finding that in the digital era, whether it's for us, if any of you want to read one book in your life, read Yuval Noah Harari's Homo Deus, where he talks about why every 15 years you have to almost completely change what you know, because what you knew 15 years back is obsolete. So analytical skills, problem solving skills, storytelling skills, creative skills, multidisciplinary exposure. So where you can look at a problem from multiple dimensions and provide solutions. These are the skills that will help you to flourish. So the traditional 4-year engineering degree will get you nowhere. Hopefully it gives you the concept of how to learn, but what you learned are not skills enough for the future. I think that's, if you look at my own career, I was trained to be a mechanical engineer, industrial engineer, spent 4 years on the shop floor, then moved to running my own startup for 3 years, then joined an education company, NIIT in Delhi, where I was running consulting. That's where I first met my friend here, Manjari. And then moved to Aptech, where Manjari also joined Aptech, and ran that computer education company for 10 years. Sorry, Manjari joined us in Zensa, and then moved to consulting, software, and now building my own company, a group of companies which are all into investing in digital. So I'm saying nobody can predict that my career for the next 30 years is going to be exactly like this. And if you do, what a boring life. So I think that's really what I think it will happen. So what it means is, and this is actually, I think maybe my friend Shashi Sudhanshu created that slide. So Shashi actually created a character called Aditi, which is the lady you see in the middle. And this is what Aditi's learning journey is if she comes on Skills Alpha, which is the platform we created. So there's an AI bot which is helping her navigating the internal social networks of the organization, helps her to collaborate. And all the time, if you see that green chart rising, she's learning, she's learning, she's learning. She's learning skills from any contextualized learning resource. She could be learning from YouTube, but the AI bot is actually helping her to learn as and when she needs to learn. And then it goes on to helping her to have coaching inputs, mentoring inputs. I mean, if I had said this 3 years back, people would think I was smoking something. But today, this is just one typical example of a digital platform that predicts what you want to learn, helps you to learn, and not just learning. I mean, we were just talking to ministry. As most of you know, if you look at Digital India, one of the biggest success stories has been Aadhaar and what Prime Minister Modi called Jam Trinity, which is Jan Dhan, Aadhaar, and mobility. But today, the Jam Trinity can be applied not just for fintechs, it can be applied for education, employment exchanges, agriculture, Ayushman Bharat, healthcare. Look at the amazing number of scale-up startup opportunities there. And I'm sure my friend Bala here would be evaluating a lot of these. In every district needs these kind of startups to come. So essentially what I'm saying is that the future of jobs is to find the power within us, to change ourselves, to innovate and make change happen. And that is where startups and scaling really happens. What can it create in employment? I touched on this. So potentially it could have a huge displacement effect where people lose jobs en masse and gets replaced by automation and robots and RPA. Or it could have a huge impact on productivity. And even the discussions I have with Niti Aayog, I always tell them, boss, don't look at AI as autonomy. Look at AI as augmentative, as assistive, and make human beings, including farm workers, more productive. Like I told you about the basketball case. And all this can happen. And hopefully, India will be wise enough to choose that path. Finally, I mean, what does it mean for India? Today, unfortunate reality is that thanks to lousy bandwidth in many parts of the country, job creation has been created. I mean, initially, as many of you know, in the IT industry, the $150 billion industry, when we analyzed it, 147 billion were coming from 7 cities. You don't know no prices for which 7 cities. How do we expand the IT industry to maybe 400 cities? How do we expand the rest of it all over. When the migrant workers moved to various hometowns in Bihar, Jharkhand, Assam, and Uttar Pradesh, they had to come back because there weren't jobs in those states. I mean, today Mr. Yogi Adityanath may be trying to create it, but it's not easy. So essentially what you're seeing in this busy slide is, if present is like this, that all this is concentrated and creating lots of problems of inequality, social unrest, etc. We have to move towards a future where there is widespread employment, widespread growth, low inequality, and low social unrest. It'll need digital leverage. It'll need all of us in this call and everywhere else to focus not just on profits, but also on environment and people, etc., etc. So let's see how that happens. What it also means is that the future of our country, and this is really the last part of what I wanted to talk about, is we will have to create what to do. What does the country have to do? As I mentioned earlier, NITI Aayog, Prime Minister's Office, all of us will have to do what is there in number 2, which is promote the growth of AI-powered, adaptive, personalized, lifelong learning. Very important. Ensure that every industry adopts the right combination of cyber and physical. Address isolation issues, which is beginning to happen through too much of automation. Government industry partnerships. I mean, what we do in the social sector in Pune, for instance, is an entity called Pune City Connect, which is a complete government, and it's really a public-private partnership, where we now have almost 27 centers for slum youth all over the city. All the capex provided by government and all the opex, maybe 10 crores per year, invested and raised by us from the corporate sector. And that partnership works brilliantly, and we have to stop distrusting the government and really working with the government to make change happen. And finally, of course, to make Digital India a reality, I think what Prime Minister Modi talked about again in his Independence Day address was reviving the whole what is called NOFIN, which is National Optic Fiber Network. And the basic promise of NOFIN is that in 250,000 gram panchayats, and as you mentioned, Bala, maybe 732 districts in the country, everybody should have at least 50 Mbps bandwidth. So that itself will open up massive opportunities for widespread jobs. And of course, skills development and livelihoods. So essentially, what are we saying? There are 4 imperatives for scaling up. It doesn't matter which industry we are in, what we are looking at, but we have to assess where each one of us are in our business today. We have to look at both the incremental change opportunities, thanks to digital, thanks to people, etc., and some breakthrough ideas. The beauty of Jeff Bezos and Amazon is that they've done so many breakthrough ideas, or Apple and Steve Jobs. And many of us are not smart enough, if I may say so, to do so many breakthroughs. But if we come up with one breakthrough idea, multiple incremental innovation, we will make change happen and we'll succeed. The problem I have with many startups is, unfortunately, and I keep being a dampener for some startups, some people just start it with 25 lakhs cash and say, I heard Prime Minister and he says, don't be a job seeker, be a job giver. But if you don't have an idea, you don't have a business model, haven't figured out your capital needs, you don't have a smart team, you're not going to succeed. And I think all of us owe it to our friends. Tell people that, look, boss, to succeed, you have to really be able to scale. And I'm thoroughly impressed with what Samir has done or what Shashi has done, and I'm sure many of you have done. You started as an entrepreneur, but you've been able to scale because you've built the team, raised the capital, etc. Very important for us to guide people like that. Also, we need to change the thinking of leaders, because people who think that the world is not going to change have already lost the plot. So thinking on customers, technology, process, data, people, future of work, everything is going to change. And of course, we have to develop the roadmap for our own transformation. Our transformation as society, our transformation as a country, our transformation as a company, and our own individual transformation. We have to each ask ourselves every month that, look, how many old dogmas or how many old ideas we have which now need to be jettisoned because something has changed in the world and we're not looking at it. I think that's what I put my favorite line there. We can either watch the world go by and wonder what happened, or we can be part of making the change happen, which is why I think successful startups, successful scaling happen. So finally, I think the building blocks are solid leadership, which is what all of us need to provide. Processes I mentioned, new co-workers, could be robots, could be Sophia, could be Watson. Agile teams, which are able to adapt very, very quickly. Multimodal communications, and of course, adaptive integrated technology that drives everything. So these are the building blocks for any company which wants to scale as we go along. So essentially, let me end with my favorite, there's a gentleman called Joel Barker, who is my favorite philosopher. So he talks about this and he says that, look, vision without action, which we're all fond of doing, is just a dream. Action without vision, if you do frenetic activity without a plan in place, it will just pass the time. And vision with action can change the world. So I thought I'll just share this with you. As I said, we've been through a large agenda in the last 35 minutes. We started, as I said, talking about the imperatives, economic imperatives, move to the whole digital agenda, move to what we need to do in the country to really make a more holistic 10% change growth happen. And of course, the imperative for organizations, for society, and for each one. So we still have, by my watch, 35 minutes. So I'll stop here. Thank you very much for listening to me, first of all. And thank you, Sachinathan, and all your advice. Any comments, suggestions, questions, feel free.
Thank you so much, Ganesh. May I request everyone to switch on their videos if that's possible for you. Let's bring some life to the conversation. Cool. Krishan, Jayesh, Pishi, Uday. Yeah. Ganesh, thank you.
Yeah.
Quite an insightful journey, 25-30 minutes over about 20 slides. And I would open it up for everyone to interact, because so whether it is question answer or whichever way you guys would like to drive this, no specific format. Ganesh is happy to answer any random points as we have agreed for. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, hi Ganesh, and thank you so much for this wonderful, wonderful eye-opener and insightful presentation. As always, I know you're a prolific speaker, and it kind of shows from the way you have connected, the macro themes to what we should do for scale up. So wonderful as always.
You're being charitable, Samir. You're saying, you're saying how you've connected unconnectable things.
See, because that's important as well, right? People can't connect a lot of things, and it takes probably a visionary person to really do that and find the exact things there. My question, or rather a comment and a question, was around, as you rightly said, learning has to be continuous, and it's a lifelong thing. And by the way, I've read Homo Deus, so it's a wonderful book. But what we find in our business, especially where it's a lot people oriented, right? Because it's a lot of knowledge workers and design being a very niche area. And we find that is not happening at all. After a certain, let's say, 4 or 5 years in the industry, the learning of people, especially designers, has stopped completely. And we see today that anybody who is above a certain pay grade and an individual contributor is not able to cope up, and they're losing their jobs, right? What would be your advice to somebody like us, me and Prasad? How do we take care of these things? Because on one hand, this ecosystem is losing precious workers, and we are not able to do anything because it is heavily dependent on that, unless we get to creating an AI that can do design.
No, you're absolutely right. But I mean, it's probably true, Samir and Prasad, in almost every walk of life. I mean, by the way, I was doing a bit of a polling with some of my other CEO friends. I mean, potentially, if you're above the age of 45, you're working in whatever company. It doesn't matter to me whether you're working in TCS, Infosys, Nihilent, any other company. Your job is potentially at risk. Because every CEO is saying, oh my God, I'm paying this guy 70 lakh salary. I can get somebody with 6 years experience, pay him 20 lakhs and fire this guy. Okay, and for the most simple reasons, you might get fired. I mean, recently I posted for a very trivial position in one of our social ventures on LinkedIn. I got 450 applications. Okay, people with like 20 years experience in IT. And I actually talked to a few of them and said, boss, kya ho gaya? Didn't you read the job posting? He said, no, if you posted it, it must be good. At least if we work with you, you're safe. I said, do I look like your mother, for heaven's sake? I mean, I might also fire you. But I'm just saying, people are very, very uncomfortable today. And that is probably because, they've stopped learning. I mean, if you read Harari's book, he says that, I mean, he talks about this wonderful story of a truck driver in America. And all truck drivers' jobs are doubtful, because whether our friend Elon Musk does automated cars for the whole of America or not, automated trucks is a surety, because American roads are so straight, the expressways, that you really don't need a driver for the truck. But and Harari talks about this truck driver who then realizes this, and he says, now I must become a yoga instructor, because the whole world is moving towards yoga. By the time he comes into the market, yoga is being taken over by the Sophias of the world. I mean, Sophia can move her limbs much better than any of us as yoga teachers. So who knows? Maybe the BKS Iyengar institutes will cease to exist at some point. So he says, every time you got to think ahead of the curve. And if you don't do that, somewhere you're losing the plot. But unfortunately, we all believe that, look, I mean, we've done engineering in COEP, we've got a good job and our life is secure. So which is why I think, to your point, we stop designing our own lives, forget about thinking design. I think it's very important to think that up. But I don't have an answer. It's just that, people have to wake up and smell the coffee and say, at least if not for us, okay, we may have survived all this, but for our children, for our nephews and nieces and grandchildren, what do we tell them to succeed in a new world? And believe me, it's scary if you're not prepared for it.
Yeah. Ganesh, just to add to this, I remember in our February last conference that we hosted in MIT, one of the statements similar to this you made to the audience, that generally in our country people lack aspirations, right? So it also probably connects to that, right? I mean, if you don't have aspirations, you have no dreams. सपने ही नहीं तो फिर सीखना क्या है, right? Where do I go if I have nothing to achieve or I have no clarity to achieve anything? So do you think leaders on this group within their own capacity of leading organization, there's a bit for them to also go back and inspire people to aspire in their life? Is there a role that a leader has to play?
I think so. And also we must also keep evaluating ourselves. I mean, I told you I set up after 4 years of work in the late 80s, I set up my own company. Okay? And it was just a whim saying, okay, let me do this. And we set up because I was pretty good in manufacturing. I knew technology. So I said, let's create a technology for manufacturing kind of company. And I remember 3 years later, and we were okay. I mean, we were a startup. I mean, we started making money after 6 months. We didn't take any funding. And I mean, again, some months I had to go and talk to my clients, Hindustan Lever and Lakme, and said, boss, I don't have money to meet salaries. Can you please give me an advance? And we had good relationships, so they paid us. And I remember having lunch with this gentleman, Rajendra Pawar, who was an NIIT founder. And he told me, he said, look, you're a bright guy. You've been well educated. Is this really what you want to do? That just take this little software startup and scale it? Or don't you want to do something in your life which later on you'll be proud of? So I said, look, and this is over a 6-hour conversation. That's one man who can talk forever. So by the time it was 4 o'clock in the evening, after I started at 10 o'clock, I was getting fed up. So I said, so what do you suggest? He said, just join NIIT and find a new word. And actually I did, and I did find a new word. I mean, that's the reality, I must say. So I think we must all be open to new experiences, and we must advise people to be open to new experiences. That's the point I'm making, because if we constrain our own thinking, who are we to tell other people? That's my point. I mean, just to give you an example, I mean, I'm sorry to take you on a slight tangent. No. Look at the whole skills ministry, which was started in 2014, of skills and entrepreneurship, the National Skills Development Corporation. Are you aware that in the first almost 500 million people that were trained almost using government money, only 12% of them got jobs. And out of the 12%, 60% dropped out of the job after 1 month. Imagine the colossal national waste of money. Why do you think that happened? Anybody? Question time. Why do you, I mean, come on, yaar, government tumko paisa de raha hai, training de raha hai, sab kuch de raha hai. Why don't you take up a job? And if you take up a job, why don't you stay with it? Yes, Manjari, you had an answer.
Irrelevant training.
Irrelevant training. What do you guys think? What happened?
Relevance of whatever they've been trained on has very little to do with their ability.
No, we all know the country needs welding and plumbing, and they teach you welding and plumbing. So what's wrong with that?
The ability to apply knowledge to learning and knowledge to a job, which I think comes back to what Samir was saying.
I'll give you another data point, but somebody give me the right answer. If you go to Dharavi even today, you go talk to a slum child who's coming out of a skills center. I remember talking to a couple of them. I said, "Ye kya kar rahe ho?" He said, "मैं कोई course कर रहा हूँ, मैं office assistant का." I said, "कब से कर रहे हो?" मैं 2 साल से कर रहा हूँ. I said, "What do you mean 2 साल से कर रहे हो?" He said, "नहीं, 3 सेंटर है इधर. मैं पहले इधर जाता हूँ, करता हूँ, फ्री खाना देते हैं, फ्री चाय देते हैं, उसके बाद इसमें जाता हूँ, उसके बाद इसमें जाता हूँ." So his job is to do skilling. Why? Anybody?
There's a funding to every course.
No, but you talked about aspiration, no, Sachita?
Okay. Yeah.
So that is the answer. we are not building agency in young people. Now, agency is a social sector word, which I learned for the first time 6 years back. Agency is becoming an agent for your own transformation.
Well said.
What we do if any of you are in Pune and you just send me a mail, I will take you to one of our skills lighthouses. What we do in the lighthouses, when a slum child walks in, when I say child, 18-year-old, we don't tell him कि हमको ये पढ़ाएंगे, वो पढ़ाएंगे, nothing. We just say, boss, you come in, like almost like Rajendra Pawar told me, 6 weeks you just enjoy. So we have these wonderful skilling centers. We call them lighthouses for a reason. And you come to the Aund Lighthouse or the Tingre Nagar or the Vadgaon Shiri Lighthouse. 6 weeks you'll just be kind of living a different life from what you lived in the slum. At the end of 6 weeks, we show them opportunities through augmented reality, virtual reality, video screens. And, for instance, just to give you an example, we all think that the country needs huge amounts of medical assistance. We know it. I mean, Ayushman Bharat, COVID, how many opportunities are there? And all of you must have, in Pune, you must have read about the horror with this COVID COEP facility, where people weren't working, the food was bad, and now they shut it down. What happens? Because people are scared. I mean, the slum child says, "Yaar, mujhe to," I've seen a lot of television mein dekhta hu ki wo AC mein baith ke kaam karte hain. Everybody wants to be a programmer. They're forgetting that programming jobs don't exist anymore or will not exist at some point. So we are actually showing them on virtual reality, wear the headset, and they will then be transported into the operating theater of Jahangir Hospital. They will see somebody looking like them, taking pulse, taking blood pressure, giving an injection. And then they say, "Arey, ye kar sakti hai, to main bhi kar sakta hu." You see the point? So you're not telling them कि मैं तुमको medical assistant बनाऊंगा, but saying, okay, maybe I want to do this. So we open up pathways. Some guy comes and says, I want to be a yoga instructor. Some guy comes and says, I want to be a guitar teacher. And we find some skill provider there. And then we are finding in our skills lighthouses that 60% of the people we train, not 100%, willingly take up jobs. And to the 60%, and this is the important factor, 95% stay on in that job because they have chosen it.
Chosen it.
Give it to them free of charge. Chalo laddu mil gaya tumko, खा लो उसके बाद देखो क्या करना. That's the difference. So I'm sorry for the long answer, but I'm saying.
Oh, there's a lot of queue there, but
Yeah, the aspiration agency, and believe me, many of our, my daughter had come last December, and her favorite restaurant is this Sea Lounge at the Taj in Mumbai. So we always go there for a meal. We were sitting and chatting and having chai, and 4 kids come and sit. Typical South Bombay kids come and sit on the table next to us, and the conversation is predictable. They're all like maybe 15, 16. So this guy says, "How are you doing in school?" He says, "It doesn't matter. My dad is anyway going to send me off to America." I mean, it's almost like today the rich Indian kid is entitled कि किसी ना किसी तरह तो अमेरिका में जाऊंगा. Okay, so they've stopped trying. And just one last story. I remember my friend Professor Shivgaonkar, who was also the Pune Vice Chancellor and then went to IIT Delhi as director. I remember going to meet him just after he went to Delhi, about 6-7 years back. And I asked him, "Professor Shivgaonkar, tell me, who are the kind of people who are getting into IITs nowadays?" Okay. And he said, "I will not answer your question." He said, "You walk around IIT Delhi and then come back and tell me what you picked up." So I actually did a half-an-hour walk, went around, went to the canteen, and I didn't understand why he was asking me to. So I came back and said, "Professor Shivgaonkar, if you don't mind, I can only tell you one thing that I picked up from this walk, that none of them are speaking good English. Sab log Hindi mein baat kar rahe." He says, "You've answered your own question." He says, "The guys who are coming to IIT are the guys from Jabalpur and Meerut and all these places who are still genuine middle-class boys who have been educated by their parents, and they try hard and they go to Kota for the coaching and they come to IIT." He says the rich kids no longer come to IIT because they stopped trying at the age of 15 or 16. The one child of a fairly rich father, who kisi na kisi tarah se he will rob the bank and send me to America. So imagine $30 billion of foreign exchange loss. I'm not saying don't get my daughter went to the US for high school. So, but her agency, her aspiration, and she's done great. So I have no complaints on that. But I'm just saying, this feeling entitled to will do this is creating a problem. And that is something that we have to control, saying people have to struggle. We all, I'm sure, struggled in our lives. We've all come from middle-class backgrounds and we are all reasonably successful in our lives. We have to motivate the youth of today to work hard. This whole 90% perspiration and 1% inspiration is extremely important. You look at Manjari, for instance, her daughter has been one of the first people in UK to become president of the Oxford Students' Union. The Oxford Students' Union, the Oxford Union is one of the biggest well-known debating societies in the world. And imagine this little kid who grew up in Delhi and Pune and now suddenly transported to UK because Manjari moved there. That's aspiration. So we want people with that, what Mahi's motivation is, for instance, we need to see that motivation in 90% of India. Only then we'll improve. Sorry, I'm getting political. We're
Thanks. Kalpesh has raised hand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hi, Ganesh. Once again, thanks actually. For over decades, I've been listening to you. I remember one of your jokes in one of the panel discussion where you were the chief panelist in Devang Mehta Auditorium of Persistent, where you said that those who are wearing suits and ties are from outside Pune, because once you asked Anand Deshpande of Persistent that what do you do when you go for fear?
No, this is a genuine story. So let me tell it for all. I asked Anand when I moved to Pune. I said, Anand, yaar, and I actually went to meet him wearing a tie. So he told me, Ganesh, ये Bombay नहीं है, ये Pune है. Pune में formal होता है, तो you don't wear chappals, you wear your sandals. So sandals पहनो और shirt tuck in करो. तो ये I'm saying, so, you learn it all the time.
Right. So, taking that ground reality, and fortunately we all belonging to Pune, I have a question for you that there is a lot of agriculture reform going on. So if we leave the political side for a while, like we keep the political things aside, like whether this is a positive reform or a Kala Kanun, all said and done, there is a lot of technological revolution happening and sought to happen actually. So we as digital community, what we should do in that direction proactively, and should we do it as a business or should we do it as a corporate social responsibility?
No, it's a good question. And I mean, if you ask for my view, see, we have 2 or 3 big problems in this country in agriculture, as you all know. 85% of our farmers are marginal farmers, which means their land holding is less than 1 acre. And 1 acre to bring up a family of 8-9 people is very, very difficult. And the other thing we all know is that, I mean, why is the government resisting putting MSP into the farm laws? It's very simple, yeah. If the minute you put MSP, every farmer will continue to grow what he has always grown, which is rice and wheat. Rice and wheat our godowns are exploding with too much of rice and wheat. Okay, what we can very easily produce and export is cash crops, it's fruit, it's flowers, etc. But for that, I mean, if you look at, they were showing a program on some Haryana farmers who already made the difference, and their cash earnings have gone up by 3 times. So this is what the government is trying to do by saying, okay, we'll get you contract farming, we'll give Mukesh Bhai will give you a contract for 4,000 acres to produce this flower, and he will take care of it. So the minute he says that, सब लोग डर जाते हैं कि ये तो गया, now Mukesh Bhai will come and take over my farm. So it's just bad communication. I mean, if you listen to people like Gurcharan Das, who are very wise people, why are so many people supporting the farm laws? Because it's an idea in the right direction, but as always, extremely badly implemented. Because we said, abhi parliament mein isko fadak se nikalte hain, and then we will make it law. And then there are some smart guys, and I'm not talking Khalistan, Pakistan, nothing. There are some smart guys who realize that this is a clear flaw of the government, but they haven't consulted. So now the whole farmer community is bhadkawing. I mean, today Bombay, there was a huge rally, as some of you must be aware. I think it's just bad communication. But the agriculture in this country needs to change. We ourselves have invested in a company called Farm Guru, which is actually helping farmers with better seed advice, better crop advice. So we have to change the farming patterns in this country. Otherwise, farmer suicides, our problems will never change. And you're absolutely right. Technology can very easily make that change. I mean, Australia, they've done it. US, they've done it. But it needs engagement. It doesn't need lecturing. And I'm not saying anything against the government. I think the laws are 90% okay. But that 10% inability to put in MSP and the inability to say that, look, I mean, a contract farmer can't come and kind of suddenly ride roughshod over you, is creating the suspicion. So I think that's where the problem is. But you're absolutely right. A bit of technology, a bit of counseling can change that. It's true for almost every walk of life.
Who is going? Gyanesh and Anand. Choose one of you. You have raised hands already.
Dr. Ganesh, thank you very much for this profound speech, and a lot of information has come in based on a lot of your experience. Thank you once again for that. I think in the beginning of your speech, you mentioned temporary productivity boost, which at least we are seeing in our organization, and how to basically sustain this for a some good amount of time, or Because we are seeing this and people are definitely enjoying it and definitely looks like it's being more productive. How to sustain this?
No, it's a good question. And in fact, Manjari, you'll be glad to know this. We are having deep discussions in GTT on who is the kind of person who can work from home permanently? Who's the kind of person who needs to become? So I think to answer your question, how do you sustain productivity? You have to do a very clear analysis of roles in your organization. Okay, there are some, for instance, we are doing some content development work for one of the large companies. And we found a great resource in Gurgaon. And she can't leave Gurgaon because she is a family person. So we're saying, okay, fine, you work from Gurgaon by all means, and we'll pay you for output. Okay, so such a person, instead of forcing her to move to Pune, which she will not, might as well do that. But like we did in State Bank, we're saying that, look, people, the CEO, and let's say the people reporting to this, the marketing head, or let's say somebody who's managing the delivery of various missions, they have to come to office. They can still, like I do, 4 hours in office, 6 hours from home. They can still work from anywhere, but the physical presence is also important. So I think productivity, to answer your question, will happen when you identify roles which can permanently work from home, where you don't even need to see the person. My former companies, Ensar, hired people in Patna, etc., which is great for people in Patna, but then they hopefully found the right roles. But for all my friends in Bangalore to say कि हम कभी ऑफिस नहीं खोलेंगे और जुलाई तक ऑफिस नहीं खोलेंगे, I think we're asking for trouble. At some stage, you will find that it's giving you this wonderful EBITDA boost, but you're creating an organization. Like, for instance, when you hire, like one of my clients in Pune was asking me, yeah, abhi tak to theek hai, everything is great, our profitability is fantastic this year, but he's hiring 40 young trainees from various engineering colleges in MP and Maharashtra. Then he was asking me, will work from home work for them? I said, no, it won't work. You make sure that you open up one of your offices, let them come and work, understand the culture for at least a month. Uske baad, depending on their maturity, they can start working from home. But so I think productivity, will have to manage people who need to be in office all the time, people who need to be in office at least part of the time, at least for some critical projects, and people who need not, mature people who can work from anywhere. So I know it's a complicated answer I'm giving you, but don't just jump to saying that, look, this work from home productivity can succeed forever. I don't think so.
Can I give a diverse view on this?
Yeah.
Yes, you know my view on this. Especially, Ganesh, since I last met you a year ago, since March, we have seen this 100% work from home, obviously, because it's Anand, to answer your question, based on the design, the traditional design which Ganesh is talking about, which all of us are used to, that you get a salary at the end of the month, irrespective whether you show up, you sit next to your boss, but still pretend to work, or whatever else. There are the organizational design is you get paid like that. But what we have done at MayaCare, we've done it for 11 years, and especially in the past 8 months. Right now, we are working with 50 persons with disability. In the next 15 minutes, I have a call with 10 team leaders, all of whom are on wheelchairs in different parts of Maharashtra, Jalgaon to wherever else. And everybody, top to bottom, is being paid per hour. And they have to submit timesheets, invoice every month. Even better, the teams are so excited because there are teams who, 15, 25 people who can't hear at all, 5 people who can't see at all, and others who saying, jab tak ye kaam khatam nahi hota, we will not get the next job. Because only when you get the next job, you get paid more. Because the organizational design is like that, it's possible. And in fact, without technology and without the fact that everybody is allowed to work from home, it would have been impossible for them to work at all. So
absolutely right. Manjari, you have created opportunity out of adversity. You're absolutely right. This is why I was right in the beginning. If you can create outcome-based jobs like my content developer in Gurgaon, and we can design around that, then it's a great opportunity. I completely agree with you. And hopefully, the point I was making in that slide about distribution of jobs, can happen because we perfect a better style of remote management, which is what you're doing in MayaCare. Absolutely.
Yeah. And all the more even with technology, because what you're saying is, my great learning in the past few months is that how do I talk to a person who can't see? How am I supposed to get work out of a person who can't see? But and utterly, confusing to 50 people on a call who some can't hear, some can't see, some has cerebral palsy, slow, all of that. And we've actually divided them into different WhatsApp groups. On the persons who can't see, only voice notes are allowed, no typing. On the other one, where they can't hear, only, typing, nothing else is allowed. A third group, when we have a call, it's actually a silent Zoom call because we're only chatting in the window. which is a big change for them, because otherwise we've all now learned sign language and more. But anyway, it's a different discussion. Sorry to take it away. But
Daniel,
Mhm.
thanks.
I keep believing, Manjari, that we learn more from the social sector than we can teach them. All of them corporates who believe social sector को हम सिखाएंगे कैसे काम होता है. Believe me, they learn it much faster. Yes, go ahead.
Ganesh, you want to go? Yeah.
Yeah, actually, thank you, Ganesh sir. It's very nice and discussion. Okay, I have this question which Samir already asked you. Like a lot of my people, I have a company in Pune, around 40 people here and around 10 people in the US. I have been running my organization for almost 10 years now. I've been facing challenges around scaling the business. Okay, then one thing that I specifically, struggled with in my past is like my background is in sales and marketing. So sales, doing like being an individual contributor gives me a lot of pleasure, and and managing the team doesn't give me that kind of pleasure. But it is kind of harming my business in a way that I do not enjoy managing people more than what I do. So my question to you, like, how much time do you think one should give for individual contribution towards particular goal, and how much should we actually do in managing people? What do you think? Because I don't want to lose my edge about what I do now. I'm scared, to be honest, that if I lose, like, if I do not contribute as an individual contributor, I might lose my edge. Like you said, like people lose, insecure about their jobs after 20 years of IT career. I don't want to be that guy. So.
No, actually, it's a very interesting question you're asking, Danish. There is no simple answer to this question, but I can just give you anecdotes. Because as I mentioned, I mean, when I joined NIIT, I was then a corporate trainer and a consultant. And I used to love it, because I used to be, when I was 28, 29, I've trained the managements of, right from some of the largest government companies to, entities like Union Carbide just before the Bhopal incident, etc. And 2-day workshop when you're 28 years old and you have this huge group of very major people eating out of your hand, it's a power feeling. Okay, you really feel that you've kind of mesmerized this audience, which obviously you can't get in Zoom because you can't really maintain that kind of eye contact. But when I then got headhunted at the age of 33 to become CEO of Aptech, I remember I was sitting with the board of the company and they asked me, so how would you like to lead this company? Honestly, I had no answer because I'd never run a large company before. So I said, look, I mean, I want to lead it by personal example. At least 10 days a month, I want to continue doing training and selling, etc. And one very wise old gentleman, a guy called KK Anand, who actually is a very big management consultant, he says, if you had told me this in the first interview, I would never have hired you. I said, why? He says, we are hiring you, young man, as the CEO of a company, not because you're Ganesh Natarajan, a great trainer. I said, what do you mean? He says, look, you may be brilliant individually. We want you to make 400 people like you. And that 400 people then become 4,000 people. That is what we are paying you your salary as CEO for. Otherwise, we would have hired you and paid double the salary as corporate trainer. So it's interesting, isn't it? Now, I always find, like in India, for many young people, their only goal is to become a manager. So you are refreshing when you say that, look, I'm great in individual sales. And I have interviewed 56-year-old, 60-year-old people in America, and you ask them, what have you done through your life? I've been a sales rep. And they say it with pride, I've been a sales rep. India, my God, if a 40-year-old guy thinks he's a sales rep, he will commit suicide by sheer shame. Because we have this thing about we have to manage people, etc. So to answer your question, if you have set up a company, buddy, you better spend 80% of your time running the company, not doing individual selling. So hire a sales guy who's as good as you. But if you like doing individual stuff, why would you not do it? So that's why I said about personal job. My son-in-law, for instance, who's married to my daughter and he's in New York, he's a PhD in particle physics from Cambridge University. He's British. And then became one of the scientists in this company, the entity called CERN. You must have heard of CERN, like NASA. They were the guys who discovered the Higgs boson, etc. He was one of those 2,000 scientists. Then they moved to the US, from UK to US, and he then did his postdoctoral in Harvard. And then he got a job in McKinsey as a data scientist. And he is still there after 5 years as McKinsey data scientist. He says, the only reason I took this job was they promised me I will never have to interact with clients directly. So he says, all the partners will go and bullshit whatever they want, and I will go in and do the real work. So there are people like you, who loves doing real work. Okay? And there are people like me who love stalking. Are any of us bad people? I don't think so. But I think very early on in life, we have to decide whether we want to be a great individual performer or a great leader of organizations. Some people like me get the chance to do both. So I count myself lucky. But you have to be very careful, especially when you're young, to choose what will give the ultimate outcome that you are out. If you're building a company, build it. That's all I can say.
Thank you, Ganesh. Again, follow-up question on that. Okay.
Yeah.
So because see, this is not just my problem. I have some really good, great, talented people. When I ask them to manage a team, like suppose I have a very good AI ML guy, I asked him like, okay, you are good at what you do, but I want you to manage more projects now because I cannot have you work on only a single project, and then I cannot make I cannot scale this company if you don't manage people. So he's like, I mean, he doesn't want to go into managerial role. He wants to be a individual contributor, and this is like problem for all the industries now, because they are looking for those guys basically who are like jobless after 10 years. Because once you go into that comfort zone of managing people, you lose the edge because you stop learning basically.
So that is why you must also think about it. Well, that's what McKinsey has done extremely well. So they have something called if you join as a young MBA in McKinsey and Company, your path to success is what they call up or out. Every 3 years, if you don't get promoted, you get kicked off, or you leave by yourself. If you don't make partner in 12 years, you're out of the company. But then they found guys like my son-in-law Hugh, and they found these guys who don't want to become partner. I mean, partner nahi banna hai. I don't want to go and talk to clients and BS them, etc., etc. So they created a specialist track. So somebody like Hugh can make more money or as much money as a partner, but he's on a specialist track for data science. So you may want to create something like that. I mean, I did that in Zensar, by the way. We created a specialist track for people who are great individual producers and don't want to manage large numbers of people. So there are not everybody wants to go from, project lead to project manager to et cetera, et cetera. Some people say, look, I'm a great AI specialist. Let me be an AI specialist. But unfortunately, I find that more appealing to Americans and Europeans. Indians all want to manage large numbers of people. So that's also a flaw in our education system. So we have to make sure that we create a breed of specialists who are proud of their technical competence and want to take it forward. See, the reason why scientific research is pretty poor in this country is because of that. Everybody wants to run a lab rather than actually put their head down and scientific research. There's a lot of education problems we have which need to be addressed as we go.
So the solution is to basically not stop learning and doing both things?
Well, I would think so. I mean, the reason I did my industrial engineering first, then after almost 15 years did my PhD in IIT Bombay, then after another 5 years did my management in Harvard, is that after every 5-6 years, I feel I'm getting obsolete. So I go teach myself something. Nowadays, of course, all my learning comes through WhatsApp and Twitter, which is very unfortunate, but.
Okay. Thank you, Ganesh. Prasad, followed by Mandar. Yeah.
So I think I took some cues from the conversation Ganesh and Dr. Ganesh you had. First of all, amazing slides. The second last slide that you presented, I think the thought that came to my mind is, we need to have a changed mindset, and that changed mindset needs to be in me and my people. And somewhere the thought came in that maybe the way we have organized our organization, the people, right? They're always about, okay, we need to finish the job and go home. So the employee mindset. And then also the thought that, there were R&D departments in, some of the organizations before, especially the manufacturing sector. I'm feeling like, okay, I think I need to have a mixed model of, people who are aspiring, as you, Dr. Ganesh, you said that maybe give them that opportunity, just pursue that particular focus and then see how we can reap benefits. Are such models kind of happening in the organizations, or people or the companies who are forward thinking have already employed such models which we can capitalize on? Because I really want to kind of change the design thinking in the real way rather than just talking about design thinking but not doing anything as an output.
No, I'm not seeing too many of those, Prasad, to be honest. But I am seeing some in consulting organizations. So, for instance, even the model that we have in Calzoom Consultants, which is our digital advisory firm, is exactly that. So we just have a very core team of 5 people, and they are managing individual producers, almost like Manjari said for Maya Care. Same thing. We have 5 principals who are not employed by us. We have another 10 advisors who all work on, I mean, they lead one project, maybe spend 4 hours per week on leading the project. And then after 3 months, they're off. And so they're like empaneled consultants. So you can actually create these cluster models, as they call them, where people can come together for a certain project, then they can dissolve. So you don't really need that large edifice of organization where everybody has his nameplate on it and gets. But so I think that will change. It will begin to change. And as more and more people start working from home, this gig economy kind of kicks in. It'll happen. Like my classmate who worked in JP Morgan for many, many years, almost 15 years back, he was told, oh, if you want, you can work from home. So he said, great, yeah, because he was living in New Jersey and working in New York, which is, as you know, is a 1.25 hour train each way. And of course, they told him, but boss, we will make sure that you're working. He said, how? He said, no, we'll poll your computer, etc., etc. He's a Jugadu Indian from Andhra Pradesh. Okay. So it took him exactly 3 days to crack the code. So he figured that every 90 minutes or between 85 and 95 minutes, there'll be a poll on whether his hands are on the keyboard or not. So he cracked that code. So he said, I built my house and my garden all on JP Morgan money by just making sure that, 6 times a day I came and put my hands on the computer. Indians can do this. I'm telling you. We are very good at doing the wrong things. The reason I'm saying this is, that's also a type of organization that was built 15 years back and they've been successful. McKinsey has been working, my son-in-law has been working from home for the last 10 months. I don't think they're going to go back to work till June. They haven't lost revenue. So it's all a question of what is the motivation of the performer. You get highly motivated people, you can cluster them in any format. But hire like an Infosys or a TCS does, when you hire suddenly 2,000 people from campus, you got to get them to that level of self-motivation before they'll perform. So I think it's a question of how you create that. Okay, guys, I have time for one last question. I have another call at 7:35.
Mandar.
This is Mandar Sathe. Thank you so much. It's been a privilege to listen to you for last hour or so. And one of my questions, I think you answered. One of my questions was that why our engineers we keep on hearing that our engineers coming out of the colleges, they are by and large not very employable, or our education system needs to be kind of overall quite a bit, so that our people, rather than coming out with a degree, they are actually making their cut into the companies with immediate productivity, or they are actually becoming more and more employable, I would say. So I think you answered the question saying that okay, our education system, at least the engineering part of the thing, is to be overhauled a bit, and I think that is something which I'm sure you must have had so many discussions with all your industry connects, as well as various strata of the society. What I wanted to ask you specifically was, and having spent a lot of time with Zensar, right, and I also have spent a huge amount of time with a service company, and then now I'm actually leading a product company as an MD for the India operations. Now, the question that I have is, the innovation part, that where India actually lacks quite a bit, at least in the tech sector, right? And this is something which has been a very relevant question for years and years together, that and no specific blame for the big companies like Infy or TCS or TechM or whatever, right? But they possibly hired a huge amount of people to make sure that they are able to provide solutions to the companies. But in that overall 20 years, like from 2000 till whatever, 2010, 15, I think that killed innovation quite a bit as far as the India as a location is concerned, right? And I have seen with my TechM tenure that a lot of competencies like AI or all the other parallels were created just as an afterthought, making sure that we have a competency, just possible to show the customer that okay, we have a team or set up to handle all your AI, ML queries and so on and so forth. But it actually killed innovation, I would say. And it could be a very bit of a controversial statement, but I would like to hear your thoughts, because having spent a huge amount of time in the industry and work with several industry leaders globally, what is your thought on that? I mean, is my understanding correct, or are we taking steps in the right direction? Or do you think if you had encouraged innovation maybe 15 years back, 20 years back, we would have been in a different plane altogether? Because there is no Apple or there is no Tesla in India. I mean, all we have is, sorry, too much lengthy question, but you get the point, right?
No, I completely get your point. And I just want to, re-articulate your thinking a little bit, because see, we haven't killed innovation. I'll tell you what we have done. We have created a services industry, which is, by the way, I told you right in the beginning that we are writing this paper on India versus China. Sad to say, but the only industry where we have far outstripped China is IT services. Okay, And I used to go, last year I obviously didn't go, but I used to go to China 3 times a year for the last almost 20 years. It's amazing. I'm a great fan of China, by the way they built. I mean, okay, fine, you can say democracy nahi hai, Xi Jinping is a dictator, etc. All that fine. But they've still built a great nation. I mean, we can't argue with that. So I'm saying, how have they done? But they couldn't do IT services. Why? Because we could create, if you need an answer to your own question, read Salil Parikh's interview in the Times of India this morning. Is there in Times of India, the Pune edition. Salil says, look, we have rebuilt Infosys through the power of collaboration, the joy of working together. That's what we created. So nothing wrong with that. I'm saying there are many young people whose lives have changed because of a TCS or Infosys, etc. Now you could argue that in a different format of education, they would have been more innovative. And look at Israel, they have some 300 companies on the NASDAQ and we have a handful. But Israel, you must realize that the most difficult commodity to find is people. In India, the easiest commodity to find, sorry to say that, is the engineer. There's so many engineers, especially the second-rate engineers from lousy colleges, whom you can hire and put into a managed services. Managed services mein kaun dekhta hai kahan se padh ke aaya? So that's really how it works. So I'm saying the IT services industry has done a service. However, what you are saying, Mandar, is absolutely right. We also now need to build. We can't be happy with a $10 billion product industry, even if that is true. We have to create much more. I was talking to Sindhu, the MD of SAP India today, and she was telling me about the 5 centers, including Pune. They have 9,000 people working. And I didn't even know it. I didn't know SAP had 9,000 people working on product technology out of India. And so does Microsoft. So I think there's a lot of product innovation happening. I'm sure you're doing it yourself. Maybe not commercialized because we don't spend enough money on marketing. Let's face it, yeah, we all know that Microsoft never made the best products in the world. But because of the sheer marketing muscle, a Netscape goes out of the window and Explorer comes in. And so many such cases. If you remember the good old days of Lotus 123 and WordStar, I mean, the minute Microsoft came in with MS Office, that got kicked out. So I'm saying, unfortunately, we're not good at marketing. We don't, or at least till very recently, we haven't got enough funding to make that marketing happen. Today, I think Byju's has got lots of money. So irrespective of what you think about his product, he's able to keep scaling, keep buying. So I think that industry is also changing. But just one last point I want to make. I remember I also have this continuous problem that look, our education system sucks. And it's terrible that we have to change it, etc. So once I was on a long flight sitting in business class with, and the person sitting next to me was CK Prahlad. I'm sure many of you have heard the name CK. CK is a brilliant guy. And I remember telling him, Mr. Prahlad, don't you think that, we have to do something about the education system in India? He says, Ganesh, let me tell you one thing. Our education system in schools is the best system in the world and you should not change it for anything. I said, why? He says, even now it's bad because, people are being asked less homework, less school books, etc. He says, don't forget the Gurukuls of the world. When children at the age of 10 were sent to the Gurukuls, till the age of 16, they were taught Sanskrit, sloka, rato, ye, wo, etc. He says the human mind is very flexible when they are that young. So all the masala goes into your mind and then slowly it gets rotated in your mind and then you become brilliant. He says, then he was asking about my daughter and my daughter just started in Cambridge at that point of time. And he said that your daughter will do extremely well, believe me, because she has the privilege of ICSC in India, where she had rattled like everybody else and became a topper in ICSC. And then she went to high school in the US, where she got the best of liberal arts education. And now she's in Cambridge, where she'll have fantastic education. He says, you read my lips, your daughter will be extremely successful. That was 8 years back. So I'm saying, so I think somewhere, I don't even know the answer. I mean, should we change our education system? Today, when I go to an IB school and, they call it IB, everybody feels happy. But, the same teacher who was teaching in SSC or in ICSC is teaching IB. So, kya padhayegi wo hai? So there is a system that we are all used to. I didn't study anywhere outside. I did my schooling in Ranchi, I did my engineering in BID Mesra, then I went to NITI in Bombay. I don't regret anything in my education. I was speaking at the Centennial Forum of Harvard Business School, and there was Anand Mahindra, there was Jamie Dimon of JP Morgan and me. And somebody asked me, saying, what has been your best learning experience? Everybody expected me to say Harvard Business School. I said, BIT Mesra was my best learning experience because they taught me how to become a man. Okay, 1 year of ragging, which we will not even mention even in this group. I mean, it is just toughens you for life. Once you grow up in Bihar, nothing in the world will shock you. I'm just saying. So sometimes we should not be too judgmental. Okay, we're all doing well. I mean, all of us are successful. maybe most of us have come through an Indian education. What makes me believe that somebody who now gets educated in Yale and Stanford will be more successful than us? Maybe, maybe not. So I've answered your question by saying I have no clue what the answer is.
Ganesh, thank you. Ravi,
Thank you.
Shriram, you want to say something?
Oh, thanks a lot. Can I speak? Yeah. Thanks a lot.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, it was great. I know you're short of time. My question would have been very similar to what was just asked. Facebooks and Airbnbs and Ubers have access to the world. Are Olas and Paytms and Oyos, when do they get access to the world? And maybe the answer is
no. But if you look at it, I mean, the Oyos of the world. I mean, if you look at Oyo has got access to the world, and to a certain extent they've screwed it up. Okay, by being over ambitious. The advantage of a Facebook and Uber has its own set of problems. Don't get me wrong, but they are able to manage negative outcomes much better than we are able to manage. Okay? And I think Oyo, in spite of, I've stayed in Oyo rooms myself. In places like Coimbatore, etc. Nothing wrong with it, guys. But they're not able to manage some bad incidents, bad outcomes. So I think we need a lot of learning to do on how to build global companies. And I think that's where we go wrong sometimes in copying a model. Nothing wrong. Flipkart, for instance, has done a great job. They've got good valuation. They were a copycat model. But with the acquisition of Myntra and everything else, I think they've done a good job. So I think we should be. Let's hope. I think the new generation of entrepreneurs, the new unicorns, I have great hope that we will be able to see some great success stories emerging.
Shriram, quick one.
Did you have a question?
No, I didn't have a question, but mostly the questions that people are raising, we have some answers to it based on our psychology-based AI assessment that we do.
Okay.
So we can identify people who can work from home independently. We can identify future leaders. We can identify people who want to be individual contributors versus managing people. And that is what their drive and passion is. So that can be done in exactly 20 minutes for people who are interested.
No, that is awesome. Yeah, Shriram, please write me a mail. I will introduce you to a lot of people who can benefit from this. Including my friend CP Gurnani in Tech Mahindra. CP was talking the same thing. We did a session with him and he was saying that now from having 400 offices all over the world, we now have 1.25 lakh offices. What it means is 1.5 lakh employees all working from home. So, people like them can really benefit from, this kind of predictive analytics.
Our 20-minute assessment can tell you what kind of work to give to the person, what kind of work not to give to the person, how to monitor that person, daily, hourly, or, like you talked about that Telugu guy or whoever of JP Morgan. So we can actually predict to some extent. I'm not saying you're 100% right, but even if you're 75, 80% right, that solves some of the problems.
Awesome. Very good.
Yeah, Shriram is a co-founder and CEO of a product called Psyche. And
please connect me to him.
It's been big time popularized in Malaysia and few countries. Shriram will, I think, keep some time your product presentation as well for this group.
Please let me know when you do that. I'd love to attend.
Sure, Ganesh. Just final 10 seconds. Ganesh, thank you so much on behalf of me, my team, and this forum especially. I hope you are available for us anytime. We would love to have your time again. CXOs, all of you, thank you so much for coming, taking out time on Monday evening. Take care. I'd scale up to 21.
Bye, guys. Bye.
Thank you all the best for your growth. Ganesh, thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye. Thanks, Ganesh. Thanks, Sachidanand.
Bye-bye.
Sachidanand, thank you, Ganesh. Have a good day.
Thanks, guys.